So with that said, we will begin. So Dr. Vatican Cherry, we're going to start with you if that's okay. So
Sure.
Just as an intro, Dr. Vatican Cherry is an interventional radiologist at Kaiser LA. He also serves as the program director for their IR residency. Completed his medical school training at the University of Miami and DR residency at the University of Chicago. IR fellowship was at UCLA. So Dr. Vatican Cherry serves as the SIR RFS advisor. He's mentored countless medical students and residents in their research and clinical goals. I have read many recommendation letters from you, Dr. Vatican Cherry.
It's one of my former students here.
And we welcome your perspective on working in a hybrid environment, having a position deeply rooted in clinical education as well. So with that said, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Words. Yeah. If you want to do your intro now, I'll introduce everyone, but before their talk. So if you wanted to have your
Oh, I mean, I think you did a pretty good job. So I'm at a multi-specialty integrated group. It's a medical group called Kaiser. It's one of the large integrated healthcare systems. When I started, I was the main thing I was looking for is some place that would give me at least clinic time. So one of the key things is the challenge that we face as a specialty is there's lack of clinical infrastructure, much less clinical know-how. So meaning office hours to see patients, dedicated space to see patients, medical assistants, schedulers, the whole shebang. So whenever you go to a job, especially a conventional DR group or somewhere that it doesn't have that yet, someone's got to do the heavy lifting to make that happen. So the one thing I wanted was just some time to see patients in an office setting or in some type of setting. And so this place offered me a half day every other week, no guarantee, that's about it. No clinic, no MA, all of that had to be developed. I was actually part-time IR when I started. And I was really looking to leave because it was taking so long to build a practice. But I'm glad I stayed. Now I have a lot of partners who get it and do about a day and a half to 2 days of clinic a week now. So it's been a big boon, but it takes a lot of effort to get here. I'll be happy to kind of respond on the Q&A.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Mary Costantino. So she is the medical director for Advanced Vascular Centers. She is a graduate of the University of California, LA as well at the School of Medicine. She completed her DR residency at OHSU and had IR fellowship at Georgetown University Hospital. She's a voting member of the SIR Executive Committee, division chair of the private practice session. That's 85% of all SIR membership. Little small plug for her upcoming SIR Business Institute. Looks excellent at the June meeting. She actively mentors other IRs in the early phases of their career, and she's especially proud of mentoring women in the fields, working to close their gender gap in the specialty. So she'll provide
close the pay gap.
And the pay gap. I like that. Okay.
And the gender gap, but all of it.
All of it. She will provide her perspective on working in an outpatient setting.
Yeah, I mean, outpatient. Well, I like all of IR, honestly. I like academics. I like it all, but I had a rocky road. I finished residency in 2006, and at the time, like, it's just different. There was no Zoom meetings, like, we used to maybe network at SIR if you were lucky enough to go as a resident or whatever. And so it's a total different era, now. But then there was no really cross communication. There was no mentors. There was no pick up the phone. I mean, I think all of us now are out here, like, just call us, we'll help you. And you have so many more resources now. So you guys are in a different era, which is really nice. But because I was in that era, I just sort of stumbled along. My first job, I thought I had like a dream job in a private practice group here in Portland. And I've managed to like carve out a career in the same city for 20 years, which is, I think, somewhat unheard of, but I have kids and I've got an established family here. And so I was in this private practice job and I thought I had sought out like a really strong clinical practice. That's why I went to Georgetown, because I wanted to do UP. And we in my fellowship, we did like full clinic, which now is sort of expected, but then it was like the only place in the country that I felt like really had that. So, I wanted to do this clinic thing and it was agreed upon when I came back, and then nobody liked it. And I was working like 80 hours a week. I was on call like all the time. I had young kids at home. I was like, this just bites. And I stayed 2 years. looking back, I should have left a lot earlier. I felt like I asked all the right questions, but I think it's very, very tricky in your first job. So really beware of the place that only hires fellows. That's a red flag. And then sometimes you want to live in a city, they offer you the good salary in the right city, and there's basically nothing anybody can tell you to make you not take the job, which is fine. Just know that I think when you seek out a job later, there's a lot more the other things like what kind of control do you have to make changes or to have whatever kind of schedule you want to have. So after that, I basically went into the outpatient field. And that was just by dumb luck. I just decided I was going to create my own practice. And so that wasn't really happening back then. It was like really freaky. But as it so happened, now here we are, however many years later, and it turned out to be kind of on the cutting edge of what was yet to come. I just didn't plan it and I didn't know it, but I just followed what I wanted to do, which was practice great IR and do fibroids and do veins and that kind of thing. So the private, I spend most of my life in the business world. I have a full lab. I'm building another one. We've got a third maybe coming. I work 12 jobs right now. I really, really, really like all of it. So I haven't given up any part of it yet, but I will successfully burn out in about 4 years. So, I think when you're younger, just the first jobs are really tough, and rely on your fellowship and your residents and your networks. You guys all have great networks now, and be really good at the medicine, because you can't do this stuff unless you like really know what you're doing in a cath lab, because you're either alone or with 1 or 2 partners. There's no hand holding. There's no like 4 doctors coming into a case. Like it is all you. So now's your opportunity just to do as many cases as you possibly can. And if you are interested in the outpatient world, you're going to want to be doing PAD, UAE, PAE. These are all things that reimburse well in the outpatient. And if you hate those things, then, a hospital-based job might be good for you. We are acutely aware in SIR that the PAD training is lacking, and we're trying really hard to work on that. But yeah, the spending time in clinic, just be like a really, 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 really good doctor. And then always get an attorney to evaluate your contract. It's going to seem like a lot of money, but it's money well spent. It'll cost you about $1,000 to get your contract evaluated. But I like won't even turn left at a stop sign without having an attorney evaluate stuff now, but that's because I've learned everything the hard way. We do have a business institute coming up at SIR. This was born out of so many people calling me to be like, how do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do that? And I'm like, oh, screw it. Let's just put it out there for everybody to hear. And so that's going to be on the Thursday of SIR. And hopefully people will like it, but it's all the players that you have to have arranged to have your business network. So it's really just an attempt to give people the information, questions that have come up over and over and over again over the years.
Yeah.
Anyway,
no, that's excellent. You touched on so many topics that we want to get to in the Q&A too, so it's perfect. Everything from work-life balance to contracts, and so. Yeah,
which is why I have to leave at 4:30 because I got to go pick up my kids from track.
Yes. We'll make sure we ask you about the lawyer in a little bit, because I did not get one. This is really interesting to hear what people's experience were. Okay, so Dr. Bashnikova, we're going to move over to you next. So Dr. Bashnikova is an assistant professor of interventional radiology at OHSU in Portland as well. She serves as the assistant program director of the IR training program. She's originally from Bulgaria. She completed her diagnostic radiology residency at Case Western in Cleveland, and followed by a fellowship at Mass General Hospital. She was my co-fellow, full disclosure. Her clinical interests include treating DVT, central venous recount, and women's health, and she will be providing her perspective on working in an academic setting, but also as an early career member, having more recently gone through the interview process and then having undergone the transition to attending hood. So welcome, Dr. Bashnikova.
Thanks. So I guess I'll start by saying I didn't really know what I want. I didn't know what I wanted when I was a fellow, so I kind of kept an open mind. I ended up applying to both academic and private practices, but then some kind of themes emerged. I was interested in teaching, not to say that you can't do that in private practice, but specifically resident training. And then also a huge thing that was important for me was the loan forgiveness program. So if any of you in the Q&A have questions about that specifically, it was something that was important to me. And I wanted to be in a setting where I could maybe see that through. There's some uncertainty with that, but that was something that I wanted to leave the door open for. Also, I wanted to be in a place that does a lot of diverse procedures. At the time we had fellowship. So 1 year of fellowship, I felt that there was a lot of education that needed to be supplemented as just coming right out of fellowship. So I wanted to go to a place that did a lot of things that Dr. Constantino mentioned, like PAD, somewhere that really was covered it all. And then also mentorship, and mentorship is huge. I'm sure all of us at some point are going to talk about mentorship and what that means to your first job and in your careers in general, and whether that's within your department or within SIR or wherever it may be. But that was huge for me, and I wanted to be in a place where I didn't feel alone in my first job, where I can ask a lot of questions and have a lot of support. So that was really important for me.
Excellent. Also more topics that we will certainly get back to. Thank you. All right, Dr. Rashan, we'll move on to you next. So PJ Rashan, he is an associate professor of radiology at the University of Colorado. He's also the program director for IR training program there. He's the director of the non-invasive imaging, as well as co-director of their HHT Center of Excellence. And he's the director of the CU Radiology DEI Committee. You are the chair as well of the SIR Diversity Inclusion Advisory Council that Dr. McGinnis is a part of. He received his medical degree from LSU, completed his radiology residency also at Case Western in Cleveland, and IR fellowship at Miami Cardiac and Vascular Institute. Dr. Rashan will provide his perspective from an academic setting, as well as someone that's been involved in the hiring process, the other side of the table.
Thank you so much, Julie. And it's great to see some good friends on here and future partners, as I always say. Yeah, so this is my my first job. I've been actually here for over a decade now. And as some of my other speakers and panelists have talked about, you have to be really cognizant of what you really want and what the job market actually looks like. It's over the past 10 years in training fellows and residents, it hasn't been the same. I've had times when fellows were actually looking out of the country for jobs whenever it was really, really tough. Now it's a great time, but as Dr. Costantino said, you have to be cognizant of what you really want to do, where you want to live. And I tell a lot of my residents that, make your list, the same thing that you're doing whenever you're going into your residency and a residency or a fellowship or independent pathway. You need to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. And the next thing is, you're never really stuck. This is a time where you have to make the right decisions for yourself and your family. Dr. Constantino also talked about burnout. We're all facing that during this pandemic, before and after. And those are things that we need to look out for. In terms of an academic contract, I mean, there are a lot of things that compared maybe to some private practices that you may not be able to negotiate as much. A lot of academic physicians, this is pretty much your base pay, and trying to make it as equitable. Well, really, it should be equitable, as we're still trying to fight for all across the board. Have a diverse practice. I really concentrate on peripheral vascular disease in an academic setting, as well as women's health and some embolization. And as you go along, you will start to carve out your niche, what you really like, what you're good at. And it's important for you to start doing that. Whenever you're first coming out, I actually really wanted to have some mentorship as well. And I had that when coming to University of Colorado. And that will change as you go along, because I've had a lot of partners who have left for other things. And as you grow older and grow wiser, you'll start to see that you're carving out your own niche. And as new things are actually coming about, you can jump on those or continue to do what you do really well. and you'll start to really focus on your collaborations with other specialties, which is really important to keep on funneling in your referral basis and the things that you like to do. And as you go along, you'll have the opportunity to get more leadership positions within your group, within your academic practice, within societies as well. So your plate will continue to grow really easily as you grow along. Those are things that people told me. Saying yes at the beginning is really important. And then as you start to grow wiser, thinking of those things that really you're passionate about and focusing on those things and moving those things over to those who are coming after you so that they can start to build their CV and their portfolio. I think that's something that's really important as well.
Thank you. Okay, last but not least, Dr. McGinnis. So Dr. McGinnis is a graduate of Duke University School of Medicine. He came to Boston where he completed residency in diagnostic radiology as well as fellowship at Mass General Hospital. He's worked as a practicing IR at Morton Hospital in Taunton, Massachusetts. He's a local since 1995, and he serves as the vice chair of radiology there as well as the president of the medical staff. He served as president of this society of NESIR from 2012 to 2013, and he currently sits on our board of directors as treasurer. Along with Dr. Rashan, he's an active member of the SIR Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board, and he's the chairman of the Awareness and Collaboration Subcommittee. And he writes an ongoing column in IR Quarterly on topics pertaining to DEI and IR. So he will provide his perspective on working in a private practice setting. Thank you, Dr. McGinnis.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to participate. So I'm 26 years out from fellowship, and in some ways, I'm still in my first job, though it's had two distinct different chapters. The first 20 years, it was a private practice job, and then our hospital was acquired by a for-profit, and I've been an employed physician since then. And these experiences have been radically different from the management side, but very much the same as far as the patient care. The patient care really isn't perceptibly much different. But I want to take a step back and talk about my journey and talk about some of the missteps and some of the successes that I've had. I started with an intention to go into orthopedics, and I had taken a year off to do some bench research on the molecular development of muscle. And when I came back to the clinical side, I just thought I'd take a radiology clerkship just to see, just to get my mind back in clinical medicine. And I started looking around, and someone said, you should go to interventional. I'd never heard of interventional radiology, but I opened the door to that lab and I've never looked back. I set all my years of orthopedic dreams aside because I found my true passion. My true passion, I didn't even know it at the time, was about minimally invasive therapies and the benefits they bring. I was the first medical student in my medical school to do a sub-internship in interventional radiology, and I was blessed to come to MGH. But one of my deficits is that I'm a pleaser. I wanted to please my teachers. I wanted to please my mentors. I wanted to please everyone, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think I took it to an extreme. In my case, it manifests itself as me focusing solely on being technically proficient. I wanted to be known as the person you could put almost any patient in front of, and I could get them through that procedure, and I did. And when I checked out of Mass General on that last day, someone had a conversation with me, one of my mentors. They gave me the only piece of mentoring advice I had about my professional development. They said, just remember, don't do your first 100 cases. He patted me on my back, and out I went into the world. I'd never thought about what kind of career I wanted to have. I hadn't thought deeply about what made me come alive at work and what ground me down. So geographics was important for me. I had developed a good network in New England, and I was going into a poor job market. There were literally no academic jobs available during that time. And I went to this community hospital. The volume was incredibly low. I remember in my first few months, a span of 3 days went by where all I had was one paracentesis. We hung in there. We made sure that we showed up to rounds. We showed up to meetings. We haunted the emergency room, and we made it clear, my partner and I at the time, that we wanted to be called first when people had DVTs, when people had abscesses. We made sure we went to tumor board after tumor board after tumor board, and we said yes to almost anything that was safe to do, and our practice flourished. I work in a small community about 45 minutes outside of Boston. It's a deserving community in need. A lot of my patients don't have $20 to their name, don't own a car, they can't drive to Providence or Boston to get good care. So I go there every day for 26 years, and I bring the best skills I can bring. It's not always easy, but it's really meaningful. Almost every day I see someone that I have long-term connections with. A patient today that I did a minor procedure on reminded me that I got him through a terrible period of renal failure 14 years ago. I barely remember him, but he still remembers me. Something as trivial as a modified barium swallow last Friday, the family said, "We remember you, we trust you. You're the one that did the lumbar puncture, made sure everything was safe." So this is how I've brought meaning to my life. You know, I won't be like my clinical colleagues whose names you're going to see in the JVIR every month, but I take care of a lot of people and bring what I think is good, high quality care to what I call this deserving community in need. We live in a world filled with need. This need can't possibly be met within the domain simply of academic medicine. Part of me thinks I should have stayed in academics at times. And when I'm having deep doubts, I think back to all the good I've done in the community and know that I've had a huge positive impact. And this is where a lot of IR is really practiced. So maybe I should just pause now and save the rest of my comments for later, but that's kind of been my journey so far.
That is a perfect way to kind of wrap up the intros, because it goes to show there are so many different type of practice environments, and all of you come from very different ones. And I think private practice is the majority of IR, and yet most trainees don't know what it's like, because just by nature of it being a training environment, it's not private practice. So I wanted to actually ask the first question that everyone has touched on in some way. And that's for the person that either is limited by geography, or, you know, it's really hard to find a job. And so they have to take, you know, a certain type of job that may not have a well-established IR practice. And so what advice do you have for someone taking a job that requires practice building? So Dr. Vatican-Cherry, I'm going to start with you, because you mentioned in the beginning it wasn't so great. First, why did you stick it out? And who maybe shouldn't stick it out? Like, at what point would you have said, it's not happening here, or how do I make it happen? And not every personality type is the same. So what thing, I saw you put in the chat box, the 3 A's, and that's very true. But
oh my God. I mean, it was torture. I won't lie to you. I mean, I thought about leaving year 2, year 3, etc. And then I think at one point I told my chair of radiology, like, hey, I'm looking to leave to the Midwest, kind of set up something like an OBL kind of practice, the Western suburbs. So I kind of laid it out. And at that point, I told him just between the down low, this is my plan. And then he brought in the director of the hospital, medical director of the hospital, and we had a kind of conversation. At that point, I got a nurse case manager and a PA, and kind of a clinic space every other week. So it kind of started all, but really just, because in a conventional group, I had to read a lot of films. So the list is never ending. So I had to read the list, and I had to come in. I basically gave 4 hours a day free. That's what it took, right? To admit my patients, to do all that. So I come in a few hours early and stay later than everyone else. There's no way I could build a practice otherwise. Not with reading the list. Lymphoma follow-ups, brain tumor, post-GAD, post-resection, and all these stuff that I had to do. So I gave 20 hours a week, and then weekends to kind of build a practice, kind of free time on my dime. Otherwise, it just wouldn't have happened. And then over 2, 3, it took about 5 years before I started seeing the benefits. And I built my talks. I spent the first years like learning clinical medicine, like learning everything about HCC and hepatology I could. Obviously going to tumor boards, we're really learning ascites management, variceal management, high sag ascites, low sag ascites, really learning that lingo and how to navigate encephalopathy and now narcolepsy. Back then it was just lactulose dosing. Admitted as many patients as I could, started to make that presence, and obviously went to tumor board, kept my mouth shut in the beginning, right? The first few years, because I knew nothing, and just tried to develop knowledge talking to my hepatologist. But once that started to accrue that data, And seeing patients over time, you learn a heck of a lot because they ask you questions. Majority I didn't know the answers to, but I'd look them up or figure, hey, I don't know the answer, but let me figure it out. And slowly but surely, I went to half day every other week. My clinics were getting busy. I was starting to see patients in between operation. Patients were getting upset. I was getting stressed out because you're doing a pulmonary AVM and patients are waiting up. So then I was like, talk to my chair again. I'm like, hey, how can I get a half day a week of clinic? They said, we have to hire someone else. So then we hired, and like now it's quite a while later, but back then we were 3 interventionalists, probably 60% IR. We now have 9 peripheral, 3 neuro, and 1 PA and 1 NP for the whole group. So it took a while, but the clinic definitely, if you own the disease, people will be referred to you. You may not operate on anyone, but you will be seen as a cognitive clinician, you'll grow it. So I was persevering. I kept at it for 3 to 5 years, but probably I could have moved further faster if I did go to the Western suburbs with those 2 colleagues, but whatever reason I stuck it through.
Yeah, and here you are today. I think being honest about how much of your own time it takes is really important, because I think everyone feels that in the beginning. Dr. Bashkov, I wanted to ask you, as an early career that is building your own practice, how much of your personal time do you feel like you've had to throw into your practice, getting clinics, getting your patients followed up on?
So I think it's a little bit different coming into an academic setting, because a lot of that referral base is there. So I think it was a little bit easier in that sense. But when you're early career, obviously no one knows your name or who you are, and there is quite a bit of anxiety there, where you need to know that you have to do a good job to prove yourself so that you can continue getting that referral base. But if you just stay true to yourself and do a good job, like you all will be trained to do, then the patients in an academic setting will come. So a lot of, especially here in the practice I'm in, I get one referral, and then I find that family med provider will end up sending me then all of her patients with similar issues. So I think it is a little bit easier if you have the resources. We have dedicated clinic time and all of that. But in the beginning, it's tough because no one knows you, and they may know your very well-known older colleagues a lot more. So it's tough in the beginning, but as long as you continue to do a good job, follow up on your patients.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
patient first. And it's very different in academics where you have well-established service lines and everything. I guess, Dr. Cosentino, to flip that to the outpatient world and how you built your practice, as you said, in the same city, and with so much success. Any advice on that?
Yeah, I was just typing how it works well for me to be able to make all the decisions. And I'm being in charge. Yeah, I look back, like, I can't believe the stuff I did, but hearing y'all talk about it, like, even I was working all the time, had these 2 little kids at home. I was like, any healthcare fair, I was like standing there alone. I look back on it and I'm like, my group did not support any of this. And they were like, okay, you can go do this on my own time. Like, nobody paid me to do this. And I basically, for the last however many years, was like, I'll talk to any amount of people, any group, just because I believe in what I'm doing. I can't do stuff I don't want to do. Kind of like you were saying, Dr. McGinnis, like, I love what I do. And I feel like I'm really good at like these consultations. And I have so many weird like patients. I do like crazy stuff. And it's because, so my job is never boring. Like, I am not just doing like UAE after UAE after UAE. I have complicated cases. I love it. But I got here because I really love what I do. And I didn't expect anybody to give me anything. Like, my group paid me to show up to work. I did boring cases there. I had to be there from like 6:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night doing like FNAs. It was not satisfying. And that's not why I went into this. And so I would do all this random stuff on my time off. And then when I had my second job, they said, what do you want to make? And I was like, well, whatever you want to pay me. I'm not going to tell you what to pay me. You pay me what you think is worth. Well, what really happened was that I'm friends with the head of HR for the Trailblazers. And I was like, hey, we need to go out to lunch because I clearly got it wrong the first time. So how do I get this right the next time? These HR people know a lot about how to pick things up in groups. Like, we're all radiologists. We're not really the best people to be doing this. So HR people know how to put personalities and people together. And so I was like, how did I get this so wrong? I thought I was asking the right questions. And what I learned, I'll never forget, she's like, look, your value to a group is irrelevant. It's what your group thinks that how valuable does your group think you are? And this like light bulb went off. And I was like, oh yeah, like I may think I'm worth $12 million a year. My group's not going to think that. So I basically, when they said, how much do you want to make? I was like, look, you pay me what you think I'm worth. I'm not going to argue with you one way or the other. I will sign any piece of paper, whatever you think I'm worth, pay me. And I said, if it's really low, I'm obviously going to find that out over time. And if it's too high, you're going to regret it. So put a number on the table and I'll sign it, whatever that number is. It turned out to be the same thing I was making in the hospital, working 4 days a week with no call. And they were very happy with that number. And I was very happy with that number. But you know, I've learned a lot of things from, and so I just have had this approach, like money is not my deciding factor, because I like to be doing things I like to do, which is ironic because I'm in an OBL now, but I put all my money back into practice. I'm not driving a Ferrari, I guarantee you. So, you know, I think that the hustle, you have to have it. And I had a partner at my first job who's still there, and his personality fits great. He shows up to work, he's like, whatever, hits the board, and then he goes home. I wish I could be like the guy. He's just like totally happy. He's just blobs along. He's still in the same job. He had to go down to call every Q2 nights. He did it. He just stayed there. He occasionally does some really great stuff. He'll be a lifer there. So you just got to know like what kind of personality you have. I feel like I'm more of an academic person and was a lifer, but it turns out I'm not. That's the other thing, is that you don't really know who you are until these job situations come up and you're like, oh, I thought I was really dedicated and loyal, but I'm bolting out of here. And it's all okay. Just have a mentor to talk through this with. But like you said, Dr. McGinnis, I love what I do so much. I think that's what's driven me. And I haven't pursued, I know what motivates me, and that's just like being able to treat patients. And I can do it exactly how I want to in an OBL. And I took the risk to build this whole thing, to do all of this, because I love the ability to do exactly what I want and not have to deal with a lot of stuff I don't need to deal with. But you got to hustle to be there. Like nobody hands anything to you.
Yeah. I think it's important to note that we can love what we do, but it doesn't mean that we love every job. And so that's why we do things like this, to show people there are all different types of jobs, because there are different personalities. I mean, IR usually self-selects for a certain type, but we're not all the same. So I guess that's
this guy Mark Gibson has it totally right. I'm like, I please, dear Lord, let me be more like Mark Gibson, but I'm not. I'm just not. So if I were, I'd still be at my first job. I'd have a nice little 20 billion years of service. Mm-hmm. You know, it'd be like nice and steady.
But you made it what you want.
Yeah.
Dr. Rashan, I wanted to ask you, what advice do you give to your trainees coming through, or people that you mentor, about their first job and about issues like this, basically getting there and figuring out you don't like it, or there's too much DR that was not promised to them, or that they have to practice build and it's just not something that we're taught how to do in an academic setting usually, as Tia was mentioning.
Yeah, so what I first tell trainees, the first 6 months, whenever you're trying to build that practice, and as Dr. Bashtakova said, you want to get them to know you, and you want to get them to know that you can do good things and that you're not making many mistakes in the beginning. And the thing is, we all will make mistakes. That's part of our practice. But you want to sort of protect yourself and not maybe choosing those super complex cases in the first 6 months of your training. Scrub in if you have that opportunity with other senior IRs or other people, double scrub if you have that opportunity to do that. So don't take on too many complex things because you want people to you want to build your reputation. And that's in any practice that you do. And as you're going along, as you said, you may actually get those more DR than you actually expected. Well, one thing I've noticed over the last 10 years is just expect change. Change is going to happen no matter what. It's how you actually deal with it. And if you don't like the DR that you're that's coming along, then make a change. If you can't make that change, find a way to actually make DR work for you. That's what's so great about being an IR. You are board certified as a DR as well. So you're bringing in cases. As soon as you note a finding, you can get on that phone and call that referring physician and say how you can see that patient in your clinic. And you can actually teach your other DR colleagues in your practice, hey, whenever you see this type of finding, send that patient to me, send that patient to, or that referring physician to me so you can talk about that. So there are ways to get around this. And know that you're not really stuck anymore. Some people feel like, well, I have to stay in here 2 or 3 years to make partner. Well, guess what? If you're going to be miserable, that's not the place where you want to be. You don't want to be a miserable partner. So it is okay to make those changes in life. Life is full of changes. And as Dr. Costantino said, things are going to change. You really don't know what you're going to be doing 10 years from now. And it's okay to make those changes. And that's what I ultimately tell trainees, be okay for change. As Dr. McGinnis said, we are people pleasers, and to certain degrees, all of us, and it's okay to say no and to just do what's right for yourself. And that's one thing that I think I have learned, throughout this process. Be okay to do things that are good for yourself, because ultimately we're doing great things for others.
May I piggyback onto that for a moment, Dr. Bowman?
Please, yeah.
So, people of my generation were raised by people who had gone through profound turmoil, and stability was important to them. I was raised by people that thought a 30-year career at IBM with that pin, that was like the dream. You guys are not harnessed in that way. You are freer. I see it in my nieces and nephews. If you're 2 years into a job and you've brought all your excellence, all your insights, all your dedication, and local culture is not interested in what you're trying to build, be brave enough to start looking and step away to a culture that will value your abilities. It only gets harder to leave as time goes on. As Dr. Roshan said, you become a partner, and then this happens, and you're head of this committee, and then you're in leadership. Like, it only gets harder. And once you're a partner, you're really going to want to start somewhere else and not be a partner. Another 3 or 5 years, be partner again. It only gets harder. Now that you're in training, I would say start thinking not just about procedures, but think about what it is that sparks joy when you're working, what really makes you feel great, and what parts of your job just kind of bring you down. Every job has pluses and minuses, but you want to be in a space where you're getting more joy and less of this stuff that's bringing you down. In short, know what you want. Know what you want. And then when you get into a job, know the culture of where you're working. I've been horrified talking to people saying, like, I have no idea who the president of our hospital is. I have no idea. I'm like, you don't know. Know who the president is, know who the COO is, who the CFO is, who the chief nursing officer is, who the chief medical officer is. Find out the structure of the medical staff. Find out what the committees are, and don't wait for an invitation to join a committee. Find a committee that interests you and get on it. You'll learn so much, and you'll establish yourself as a reliable clinical resource that people will want to refer patients to, especially if you get on the peer review committee, things like that. Was that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah,
Definitely
that peer
helpful.
review committee stuff is really important. maybe not like right off the bat, but after like a year, just volunteer for one or two, like not too many, one or two committees, and don't say a whole lot for a while, and you'll start to see how all the politics and stuff works, and then you'll be like, oh, I see how decisions are made. Outsmart it, like outsmart the system. Just say like kind of low and quiet, and you'll know the power players that way, and then they'll start turning to you and asking you your opinion, and then they'll want you on every decision-making thing.
Arming
You know,
yourself
like a
with
sneaky
knowledge.
little way back door.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, I know Dr. Costantino, you're going to be jumping off soon, so I do want to ask the contract negotiation questions now. So we're getting also a lot of questions. So when should people get a lawyer? When shouldn't they? Dr. Rashan mentioned in academics, it's very different. There are usually not a lot of negotiables in there, but you know, non-competes, what are things that people should be getting legal advice on, if anything? And I kind of want to hear from everyone, like what, if they negotiated or what they think is negotiable depending on their practice environment. So Dr. Costantino, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so my employment attorney, we did a back table podcast on this, and she did most of the talking, which was good because she's an employment attorney, not me. But you know, don't off the bat, people always think about salary and vacation, and that's actually probably, I mean, it's important, especially women. Women were under negotiators. The guys that are out there like, we'll take $10,000 more, and the women were like, okay, we'll take whatever. So definitely you want to, but you know, academics, I don't really know. I mean, Tia will know better about how much is negotiable. I know that OHSU, it wasn't for many years. They were like, here's your contract, sign it, yes or no, and that was the end of it. And then you can do some small things like moving money, etc. That's a very short-term, narrow thing, though. But it does contribute to pay disparity because if you start $220,000 less, your raises over the course of your year and your contributions to your 401ks and all these things are just percentage-wise less. So let's take the salary and vacation off the table because it's the obvious ones. Your non-compete's really important. A lot of places will have it in there. Like I have non-competes for people who work here because I don't want them starting a place right above me or something. But they are really kind of bad and a lot of times non-enforceable. So California, they're non-enforceable. But it's just easier if you don't get involved in one. Usually they're going to be in your contracts and they're going to have a radius. So like you can't compete for 2 years within 10 miles. What you need to do is look at where would you go if you didn't want to work there anymore. Now, your places are going to be smart. They're going to, like where Tia works, they're going to get on Google and do a mileage assessment of like where are the major hospitals, and then they're going to make it 0.1 miles more. Like they figured this out. So what you need to do is you can say, oh, that 20.1 miles, I want to make that 8 miles. And I mean, you don't have to say, because I calculated the distance of all the hospitals, but so let's say you live in a more rural area and you think that if you didn't work here, you would go that way to that hospital over there. They may not care so much about that, but you know you've carved out your next sort of place to be. Let's say you live in the middle of Boston. They may say, like, we want the whole city. And that's going to be a different negotiation. Now, the reason you want an employment attorney about this is because they see all the contracts happening. So like my employment attorney knows what like tons of doctors are. They know, and they also usually know what the hospitals are and the groups are saying. So because like my gal works on both sides. And so they know what's status quo, like what's going on right now with the culture, right? Like where's the wave? Like how are things going? And you want that information. And you want to say, what's normal? What's normal right now? And do you think I could get away with X, Y, or Z? And they may say, absolutely not right now. All the hospitals are being hardcore. You'll never get away with it. But there's no way for you to know that. That's the number one reason to have an attorney. Number two is people will slide all sorts of stuff in there that is one little sentence. And it can be, you know, the contracts are supposed to be what's like fair and reasonable. Well, you don't know what's fair and reasonable because you've been spending your time in a dark room while the attorneys have been out there trying to figure out what's fair and reasonable. And that's why I would say, like, are you signing something that's totally ludicrous? And you know, I've signed probably 60 contracts. And I'll admit it, I have signed some really bad contracts, including in the last year, that people who were on my side were like, just sign this, and I've signed them. The only person who's held accountable for that contract is me or you. So like you research, it's just crazy how much we would research where we go to residency and you wouldn't research the legal document you have with your job. And so you need to understand it, but it's understandable. Like, what does it say? Does it seem like is your group handing you a contract that seems like really controlling and really locked down? A lot of the groups, like my first job, they had some employment attorney 15 years ago, and they used the same contract all the time. So it is like really old contracts, standard turn and burn. And a lot of places will do that because they don't want to pay some attorney $3,000 to go redo a contract every time they hire you. So they've got some employment contract from 15 years ago that you sign, and everybody's just like, whatever, we sign everything. So I think it's well worth it. I mean, it's ideal, and you got to get somebody in your town or in your state, because state laws are really important. And employment law is a big deal. Like as an employer, at least in this state, employment law is a big deal. Like, and so things you don't understand, like, if I don't pay you on time, you can sue me for tons of stuff. I don't want you to know that because I'm on the employer side, but you know, it's not easy. It's not just like, what's my salary? It's a whole field, and you just should defend yourself because you're the only person who's going to defend you. Now, if you get into trouble, let's say you get into job trouble or something doesn't happen, or like that you want to have happen, or you're thinking about leaving your job, your first place, in my opinion, should be to an attorney to figure out what your restrictions are, unless you're moving cross country or something. But then again, I don't know. I just think that things can, and I've had very, very nice parting from every single one of my groups. I've not gotten into any conflict with any of the groups I've ever been involved in. But I think the reason is because we both know what these contracts say, and each side has always like done what we needed to do to honor the contract that we signed. So you need to understand that stuff. Oh yeah, tail coverage, huge. Do not try to get out of your tail coverage. Tail coverage could be $50,000. And I have friends who have left jobs and they're like, oh, by the way, before that door hits you on the way out, I'm gonna need a check for $35,000. Well, that's hard pill to swallow when you're decide after 11 months you don't like your job, and you know, like you're brand new and you got babies at home or whatever you have.
I also want to ask one more question before you have to run, Mary. Is the maternity paternity leave, do you mention it? Do you try to negotiate that? Do you feel like there's ramifications from asking about that?
Yeah, it's complicated. When I took a year off, I basically finished residency and then took a year off to have babies, and was told if I have kids, it'll ruin my career very directly by attending that I looked up to a lot, and I believed them. But still, I had kids anyway, because along the vein of, I guess, just doing the things I wanted to do. So, and I took that year off and I worked locum. So we didn't have kids in IR back in that day. There were like, not one person had been through a pregnancy that I knew of. We're in a different era now. It's a dicey one because it's more about your colleagues, you know, and what you put your colleagues through. Obviously, as a woman with children, like, and I'm very involved in my kids' lives. I was like the PTA president. I do the Boy Scouts. Like, I do track. I do like, I'm doing football dinners. Like, I do all the junk. I'm very involved in my kids' life, but it's very, very challenging to be this involved in your kids' life and have a full-time career. Like, it is not easy. And there's no right answer to that. And I have no hobbies. And you just have to accept it. Like, my hobbies are the kids. Like, I love the wellness and junk like that, but I do not see, I just feel like that puts an unfair burden on younger people who are being raised to think I should be well, I should be at peace, I should be a great mom, and I should be a great IR. understand how that could possibly happen. So I felt much better when I was like, this is just a cluster F, and I'm fully committed to my job and I'm fully committed to my kids. And now they're 14 and 16, and guess what? They'll be out of the house. I mean, I had to go pull my kid out of a ditch he ran into the other night, and I do all of it. And they're going to go off to college, and then I will like read a book. But I just don't think there's a reason to try to stress myself out by this at this point. And I'm hearing younger people. I'm on the board of a charity downtown. I'm super involved in that. Like, I've got a lot of community involvement. But I stopped worrying about all these things I should do out of this like wellness stuff, because it was just stressing me out. Like, I was like, I feel tired and imbalanced, but I love everything I do. So I just wanted to say that, because I feel like there's so much pressure on people to like have great relationships and be ever present and be centered. And if you didn't work, I would be centered and read lots of books, but I love what I do and I'm not giving any of it up. So, and young kids are really, 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 really hard. And I had a full-time nanny. The only way to do it, you have to have an au pair and some nannies if your husband or wife works. If you got a 2-professional household, and you will feel like you're going crazy, and you'll be like, this must only be me. And when Women in IR started, I wanted to talk about 2 professionals in IR, and 2 professionals, because that's where the problem is. It's not women in IR, it's 2 professionals where both parents are like working. And how do you fill the pieces in? So either you have a spouse at home, or you have lots of nannies and lots of like help for like 6 or 7 or like 10 years. And then they get older and it's fine. And I have a great relationship with my kids. So I don't know. This is where I feel pretty passionate about being a female and feeling this like maternal pull, and the dads get it too, but I do all the cooking. I do a lot of cleaning. I do all the traditional, I do camping. I just like to do everything. But I don't feel the need to make sure that I feel like completely balanced all the time. If you do, then good luck. Okay, so now I went off the question. What was the question?
Well, no, we were
So
talking
can I
about
just
maternity
chime
and
in for
paternity leave. Yeah.
Yeah.
You brought up 2 interesting things. I mean, one is you said someone told you don't have kids, which they would never say to a man. But this is a microaggression that happens against females again and again. Oh, don't
It's
go
a
into IR, it's too much
macroaggression.
call. It's a
I
macro.
can remember the moment. I can remember like yesterday, because I really respected this person. And to me, they were the end all be all. The pleaser thing that you talk about. I wanted to be at the place I wanted to be in front of this person. And on the flip side, when I got pregnant, I had to let my fellowship director know. I dreaded that call for 2 weeks. And he was like, basically, family is the most important thing you're going to have. This is a different environment now, but it wasn't then. Yeah, no, it's a total macroaggression. But I had so many things like that happen. I mean, I have stories that I would never talk about on a recorded video session, but that was.
But even in
era.
even in 2 physician families, the female physician on average does 8 hours more a week with household responsibilities than their male partner does. That's a full working day.
Yeah.
So it must be extremely hard to find balance. I don't think anyone's going to find perfect balance, but
Not with kids.
yeah.
But it's okay. You just sort of accept it, but don't feel pressure to be balanced, I would say. I wish somebody told that to me. I thought I was doing it wrong all the time because I was like so alone doing it. The maternity thing is tricky because I see both sides of it. I see every side of it. Having worked right up to the day. Now, I had taken 4 months off, but I didn't have a job. I timed my locums in my fellowship to start, and I had 4 months, and I was like, I'm ready to go back to work. But at 6 weeks, those little babies are just, I mean, they're like this big. Before I had them, I was like, at 6 weeks, that's an eternity. It'll be fine. Kid will go to daycare, it'll be fine. I did not feel that way after I had the kid. And so, the more, and I am a big believer, the more time you can take, the better. You never get it back. It's hard. Hormones fly. Like the first kid is just like somebody just dumped you on your head and continues to beat you until you finally wave the white flag. And that was a very, very challenging time. And then you enter into like the little kid phase. So I really like women who have the time to go through what they need to go through. Like Sweden has it right, like Europe has it right. We have it totally wrong. 6 weeks is like really hard and bad. But if you're in residency and fellowship, I don't know there's any way around it. And then as a business owner, you know, straightforward, like I don't really want to fund somebody to be doing something for 6 months. And how do I employ people? Like I rely on these people. So I see all sides of this. So I don't have any right answers. But it goes by fast, but it doesn't feel like it at the time.
Yeah, I think that's there's been some comments in the chat box too. Like every group has a culture. And I think, you know, if you're at the point where you're looking at a contract, you've had an interview, you've met the group, you can kind of understand what that culture is. And if it's something you even thought you'd be a part of, otherwise you wouldn't be looking at the contract. And so you can at least gauge family friendliness from your interactions with them.
Yeah, I mean, I've sought that out with, everybody like, yeah, we're so family friendly. All the guys were dads. But guess what? Before I had young kids already, I never talked about my kids for like the first 3 years. They were all very family friendly. And we're in Portland, Oregon, like the land of family friendliness. And but it was actually quite the opposite culture, which I don't even know how you'd figure out. The guys were with pride, not showing up or having to work on their wives' like delivery days. And it was like the cool thing. I know it's like unbelievable, but I was right out of fellowship. I was just like, I don't know, maybe this is normal. It just seems so weird. There's no pride in like working around, and they wouldn't give each other like scheduled C-section dates. They wouldn't give each other the time off. But yet when I interviewed, everybody's family friendly. So I think the interview, I don't know, maybe you guys have other things to say, because I sure as heck got it wrong.
I'd love to hear what other people think about this topic. Dr. Rashawn, I see you nodding your head a lot. So I'd love to hear what your perspective is from hiring people, or what advice you give about this.
Me?
No, Dr. Rashawn, yeah. Or, I mean, whoever.
Oh, go, Dr. McGinnis, you seem like you have go ahead with your comment first. Okay.
Someone I respect greatly told me about their wife, who's an OBGYN, who hours after delivery went on to the wards to start to write orders and take care of patients. And Mary, the way you're nodding, I know you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And to me, the implicit message they're saying is to be a successful female proceduralist, you have to be a superwoman. You have to be the kind of person that deliver a child and then hours later get out in the wards and start. It's like, I just think it's unhealthy. I think culturally we have to rethink this whole thing about how we integrate family into our work life.
It's not just women. I think that's important to point out. It's not just women. Men are dads too, and have families and kids get sick, and you have to be, you know, like, so those are all, it's not gender specific. Obviously there's the recovery process from children. That's a separate thing, but I don't want to make it just about maternity leave. It's also paternity.
Right. And I think the most important thing that we're doing now, more so than ever, is speaking up about it. Speaking up that it's not right. What's legal and what's not legal. I mean, that's the thing. And some people may say they have the autonomy of this is what we do in this organization. Well, guess what? You just don't work in that organization and you move on. I think we have collectively, RFS medical students, we've been rewriting things about family medical leave, what is right. And more organizations, societies are signing that as well. But we need to keep on with this conversation. Yes, maybe within the last 20 years, we weren't talking about this. We were just accepting it, but it's not time to accept it anymore. We need to do what's right for us, do what's right for family medical leave. And you know, but looking at it, it is a scary thing to say, to stand up for yourself whenever you're have your superior, your boss, and you say, well, no, this isn't right. I mean, residents go through that and medical students go through that all the time with their attendings. but we need to protect each other and know what's right and what's not right. I think that's the hardest thing to do, is to speak up, because we all feel that we're very vulnerable in many aspects. Females, underrepresented minorities, you name it. Just saying yes, I'll take this and we'll move on. I'll try to be a super person to get this job done. But we have to take that opportunity to speak up, because until you speak up, things are just gonna keep on being like they are. And people may not like it, but if you're right, if you're within your legal rights, things can change.
There is the business side of it that, is a challenge, because how does the business, the job, and the personal desire all come together? I believe in a win for everybody. I'm always trying to find the win for and I will bend hugely. So what you're talking about is, making something, a workplace is the best when people are there happily. When you have gone to have your babies, or you're the dad and you've had time off and everybody's bonded and everybody's happy and we can all be flexible and work together, that creates a lifelong employee, and that's the win. But a lot of people don't see that. On the flip side, we have to cover in a hospital like the wards, who covers the job? And so I think that approaching these things fairly and reasonably, and then also consult a lawyer.
No, I
would certainly, if anybody came to me and said, I have and fill in the blank, I would run right to my lawyer and I'd be like, is this a protected class? Is this, because which is very good right now that we have this. I think the power is in the hands of the individual now, I feel like. So as the business owner, I'm always terrified that I'm going to be like, yeah, no problem, blah, blah, blah. And then get in trouble because I said something wrong, which is unfortunate, because it makes me have to be more restricted in the conversation, because I'm afraid of stepping on a landmine.
Yeah, but that does go to show that there's also a lot of mention in the chat about state laws. They apply to all different, not just maternity and paternity leave, but non-compete. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into contracts that's state specific. So obviously know where you're looking for a job and what those rules are, so that you come armed with knowledge, and then you kind of know what your rights are. But Dr. Rashan, you're right. You don't have to work at a certain place, right? So if you really don't mash with what either the culture is or the rules of an institution, it's better to know that up front. So I think that's kind of a theme that we're getting here. Arm yourself with knowledge. I do want to get a little bit into a few nitty-gritty things. First one, Dr. Bashnikova, was public service loan forgiveness. Medical student loans are enormous for a lot of us, and they really play a big role in that first job. And I kind of wanted to hear your experience about that, because I think it affects a lot of trainees.
Yeah, I made a comment in the chat where, in addition to having a lawyer, it's good to maybe consider a financial planner. Preparing ahead of time, kind of learning what your finances are, and if something like loan forgiveness will benefit you. I ended up really reading a lot about it, looking into it, trying to make sure that all of my boxes were checked. And also I ended up hiring someone who specifically specializes, a financial planner who specializes in loan forgiveness. So, it's not for everybody. It doesn't always work out. You really have to have a lot of forethought for that, to kind of, and Julie, we've been and kind of knowing other people who have gone through it, who are dealing with that, with having many loans, and also kind of deciding, well, how many years will it take me to pay off these loans working in a private practice, which, if you have your dream job in front of you, some things like that, like having loan forgiveness, is not really a priority, if you know that you can pay it off quickly in a private practice setting.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you probably mentioned it in the chat and I just missed it, but the reason this is something that goes into people's thought processes is because you have to be at a nonprofit organization. So usually people trend towards academic centers, but there are some non-academic jobs that may still be 501c3 or nonprofit. But that's another thing that might go into your thought process when you're looking for that first job, to contribute to 120 payments.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And also just, I want to make a comment about some of these. I don't want us to like freak everyone out and just kind of overthink a lot of this stuff. So we're talking about, you know, maternity leave and paternity leave and culture of a practice. A lot of that is hard to kind of learn just from the interview day. So I just want to remind everyone, it's something that I was always reminded of when I was going into the job hunt and all that. Your first job doesn't have to be the perfect job. It's something that we really have to remind ourselves. And if things are not, I guess if you're not really if you're having trouble navigating some of these issues that we're bringing up, standing up for yourself is so important. And it's something to remember that I think no job is going to be perfect. So it's important to have that perspective. So there are many things to consider, and that's why we're having this webinar, but like, you know, nothing is going to be perfect.
Yeah, absolutely true. The next nitty-gritty detail I wanted to talk about is RVUs. Every job's weight on RVUs is different. So I'm going to first ask you, Tia, because you're academic, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Rashawn also as academic. Do you know how many RVUs you make? I'm not asking for numbers, but are you aware of your RVU numbers, and do they matter for a bonus?
I have no idea what my RVUs are, and they do not affect my bonus in any way.
Okay, I'm also going to answer that question. I have no idea what my RVUs are, and they do not affect my bonus. Okay, Dr. Rashawn.
Okay. Sometimes they tell us what our RVUs are. Now, the big thing is, how does that align with what resources are you going to get within your practice, within your division? You may be working 120%, but what the numbers say about the procedures that you're doing, the amount of procedures, turnover time, that all goes into, well, what resource? Because all in all, it's not just about you, it's about the team around you and getting those patients in, schedulers, getting nurse extenders, getting tech extenders to get things done. But when you go up and you ask for that, oh, we don't have any money. We're not going to do that because what number we have here does not match how much you're working sometimes too. So I think that's the key there. How much are you actually working? That you need to know that number so that you can go up to whatever hiring staff you have within the hospital, within your practice, say that, hey, I need help because I'm overworking right now. And if you're not getting more resources, money, time off for the amount that you're working, then that's some inequity right there too. So it is important to ask that question because someone knows, your director of financial affairs knows, and is he or she actually getting it right? That's the next question that you need to ask.
Yeah, and that is something we know our section chief knows, we know the department knows, RVs are always tracked. It's just a matter of how much they impact your everyday, your salary, and then what you can ask for. Dr. McGinnis, you had your hand up. Did you want to go next? You're muted.
I'll keep this brief, but you know, when the pandemic started grinding full force in Boston and we were relatively early, I was absolutely enthusiastic about getting my diagnostic colleagues to work from home and to get them home workstations. And every day I would show up like all of you, and I was the person in the hazmat suit going to the ICU, putting in line after chest tube after line. And I did not do much DR work because I was fully in the fight. And I was told I would be getting no bonus because my RVUs weren't enough. This was the proudest moment of my career, but my practice only gives bonuses based on RVU. Now, I won't say a bad word about them, but you can better believe that now I have helped structure things so that RVUs count no more than, I think, 50% towards bonus. It has to include committee work, service, participating in a QC process, participating in forums like this, writing articles, giving presentations, all these things. We're going to look at value comprehensively. We're not going to just look at this artificial number that doesn't really reflect the deep commitment that IRs tend to have towards institutions.
That's fantastic, and that should be a model, although it's not everywhere, as you had to create that in your environment. So that's fantastic.
That comes back to the value thing of, like, you have to understand the people making decisions at your organization, what's their value. So if it's an RVU value, then that's what it is. And that's actually a great question to ask when you interview. How do you value your work? How do you qualify? If they say, oh, don't worry, we don't, they're BSing you.
Not real.
Yeah.
Dr. Vatican-Cherry, what's been your experience with that?
No, I mean, definitely we are RVU driven. Obviously in the beginning, I read a lot in the beginning, so it wasn't much of an issue. In our global system, definitely the interventionalists are struggling when it comes to generating the RVU. So it's something that we're talking about regionally and how to kind of amortize it, because we have a lot of data on that. For me personally, it's not as much of an issue because I'm mostly doing, angioplasty, stent, atherectomy / embolizations for most of my week. And so because of that, I don't personally get as affected anymore. So as you build those kind of case volume, it's not an issue for me, but for other interventionalists who are maybe do more of the biopsies and drains, it is becoming an issue. So something we're working with our organization to go, hey, we're working quite a few hours compared to our DR colleagues. And so we should have a little bit of, latitude on that. But it's definitely a real issue for us.
Absolutely. I guess along these lines, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. I don't have anyone specifically, but a lot of corporate groups are buying practices. And so what are your thoughts or your opinion on this trend, and what advice do you tell people that may join a practice that just got purchased or is going through that process?
I'll start. It goes back to what I'm saying, that things change. Things will change as we go along. And we need to speak up at how it may affect you personally, how it affects IR. But medicine has changed. Medicine is not the same that it's been 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. One thing that we still need to do, and as Dr. Constantino said before she left, is our value, your value in medicine. That's one thing that should actually get better, and that we should actually look at. And yes, there's other corporations buying things. Do we really have control over that? Can we really reach in our pocket and say, well, I'm going to stop that from happening? Well, we collectively can maybe say, well, what's right for our patients? First and foremost, what's right for our patients. And then our value for us, for everything that we do. So that's my, right now, that's my thoughts on that. But tomorrow, 5 years from now, that may change too.
Dr. Vatican-Cherry, you were unmuted earlier. Do you have any thoughts on corporate purchasing of practices and starting a job
it's
there?
a real deal, right? So certainly in Southern California, I kind of know a lot about the history, and kind of Rad Partners has kind of dominated. They take on over 14 hospital system that was Renaissance. And I know a lot of the graduates who go there. The challenge is what they're, again, the money generated by these PEs is really the imaging, not necessarily radial in the IR. The IR is for a contract. So they try to put these people to read at home and get kind of, specialty, subspecialty reads, really rapid turnover for various hospitals, rapid turnaround times, and kind of incorporate that. And then the IR is kind of the boots on the ground, but they make them go to 2 or 3 facilities. And so there's really no way to easily generate your own kind of niche or, be at one hospital and be available to them. So now if they already have developed an infrastructure, they have all that overhead developed, they have a clinic, they will continue to support that because it's already generating the revenue that they want to see. But it's less likely for them to put in all that time and effort and money to wait for 3 to 5 years to get a return on investment, at least for these corporations. So their really focus is on the RVU generated from imaging and the finances from that for the most part. Not all of them, but for the most part.
That's really helpful. And I think especially for people, if you're going out there and looking for jobs, just to kind of know what that would look like working for a corporation as opposed to a physician group.
I made that big transition from being a private practice into one of these, and I'll just completely validate what's been said so far. They are looking at these numbers and productivity. It can be dehumanizing when taken to an extreme, because you no longer represent yourself. It's almost like you're this piece in this greater puzzle. I think IR allows us to differentiate ourselves because we actually see the patients. We're touching the patients. It's harder. I will say these organizations also come with their own cultures, and the dominant culture in which we live is still very patriarchal, heteronormative, largely white, and it can be challenging if you don't come packaged like that and you're trying to exert yourself against the power structure of these organizations. I hope I was polite.
All right, well worded. In our last little 5 to 10-ish minutes here, I have 2 questions. The first one is about work-life balance, because this is something that new generations are coming up and it's important. And I think it will change the culture of how we practice, and it already is in a way. So I kind of wanted to ask each of you how you attempt to maintain work-life balance. There's no judgments that people have attained that. I certainly haven't, but I think asking about that. And then I kind of wanted everyone to wrap up with some general advice. So first, we'll start with work-life balance. Tia, how do you achieve that in your first, few years of giving up all your free time for work? How have you maintained that?
So, the first thing I want to say about that is, for just those of you interested in academics specifically, a good question for interview day is to specifically ask about academic time. Is that protected? Is that something that you will have reliably, or is it separate from clinic time? So I think that going into the interview process, just knowing what to expect is important for the academic setting. I'm just going to be honest. I think the first 6 months to a year of your first job, work-life balance is going to be almost impossible. I don't want to be negative, but it's just kind of the truth, because you're just getting your feet wet. You're not really sure going into a new practice how it is. But with time, you kind of learn how to let things go that maybe in the beginning you wouldn't, and refocus yourself to provide yourself with better work-life balance. But in the beginning, it's very tough. With experience, I think that's when you sort of learn how to have that for yourself.
Yeah, so you said 6 to 12 months, and Dr. Vatican Cherry said 5 years. So I'll ask Dr. Vatican Cherry about his thoughts on work-life balance.
Well, I mean, my coming out of my training, I went through a diagnostic residency program. I had a 1-year fellowship. I was much more behind than the current graduates. They didn't have an RFS. I have first-year med students who are presenting at these national conferences who know a lot more than I did coming out, right? So my clinical and technical skill set were far behind my counterparts. So it took me longer to get to where I needed to get to than most of the graduates now. So that, I was just behind. So it took me just more work and effort. But, over time, slowly grew, right? The first time my clinics were getting busy, had to hire another one, had to hire another one. Once your clinics grow, each time it's easier, right? So you have 2 people, 1 person you have to work 100% harder to build to 2. 2 people, 50%, 3, 33% if you all are in that growth sector, so on and so forth. So you have 9 people, you only have to work 11% harder each one to grow your sector to hire the 10th. So if you look at it that way, then it tells you where your growth sector can be.
Absolutely. Dr. McGinnis.
So I have utterly failed at work-life balance, but as someone that's deeper in my career path, I want to tell you that self-care is extremely important. You've got to know what you want. And if you want to be an IR for 5 or 10 years and then transition to DR, there's no shame in that. That can be a wonderful, fulfilling career. But I want to tell you, as a runner, IR is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if you invest yourself in your early years without taking care of yourself and you burn yourself out, you're not going to be strong for the marathon. You know, I consciously make choices that mutually reinforce each other. I exercise daily, vigorously, on a daily basis, very early in the morning. So no matter what happens during that clinical day, it can't be taken away from me. My self-care will never be taken away from me. My diet is something I pay attention to. It's not perfect, but I pay attention to it. And the gift of COVID for me is I really have rededicated myself to the principle of getting adequate rest. The last principle of self-care I really want to tell each and every one of you about, and as trainees, you think it's not important. I'm telling you, it's critical. Start planning for your retirement now, now, now. The power of compound interest is profound. And if you're going to be in this marathon, there's going to be times when you get in your 40s, your 50s, maybe your 60s, and you or your family are going to need you. Being able to have that nest egg and not have to rely dependent on that paycheck is going to give you a level of flexibility and freedom. As I think Dr. Bachnikova said earlier, get a financial planner. I think one of the goals of this section could be making young IRs more financially literate. But now is the time to start planning for your retirement. I don't care if you're saving minuscule amounts. Understand the discipline of saving and understand investing. These things they're different. They're not the same thing. Saving is not investing. But you know, there'll be points in your career where the proceeds of your investments will be yielding more than your salary.
That's an excellent goal. Dr. Rashan.
These are all great points. And as this webinar presents, there's so many different ways to actually go through this. And Dr. McGinnis said it right. I mean, you have to look at your wellness right now, and that wellness looks different for everyone. Some may be working out, some may be music, some may be playing this, some may spending time with your friends. I mean, you may have an aspect of your work that you find that it's wellness for you, and it's not really work. So whatever it takes for you to feel happy and smile about, and to breathe, be able to breathe the correct way, just do it. But you have the ability to do that now. Dr. Vatican Cherry said it, all of you are in a better place, better than we were. You have so many resources right now. 15 years, 10 years down the road, you will be talking to the next generation about what things made it better for you. And it may be a totally different conversation. But the one thing that is constant is we're still all human, but a lot is on our shoulders every single day. And if this pandemic has showed us anything, it's how vulnerable we are and how things can be taken away from us just like that. So think about those things, being grateful for what you have. We're all really grateful to be in this situation, to be talking about this, be in this great field. Not many people have this, millions and millions of people who cannot be saying this. And we have the ability to just impact so many lives. But think about yourself. Don't feel bad about thinking about yourself, taking that 30 minutes, that hour a day to reflect, to meditate, to do whatever you need to do. Write in a journal. There's so many ways that you can actually do that for yourself, but make it a pattern. And sometimes you may fall off the wayside. That's why I said it's maybe a work-life integration. Whenever you have kids, whenever something impactful happens in your life, it's okay, you're human, you may fall off. But know who you can maybe lean on. You have a lot of people on here you can lean on, family members, significant others, to get back on track and do it again. And that's some things that I think it's not told to you as you go through life. things may happen, life changes happen, but know that we all go through this and it's not the end. But take care of yourself first. You'll have those mountains and those valleys, and that's just the number one thing that we can just really count on. But knowing that people are vulnerable, things happen, and we're human. So just take care of yourself.
That was a perfect way to wrap up this webinar. I think the chat has some excellent topics too. So thank you everyone for participating in that. We got through a lot of questions on the chat that we couldn't talk about out loud. But thank you all for joining. This is recorded if anyone wants to watch it later at a different time or has some co-residents stuck in cases that want to see it. But thank you again. A little plug, we will be doing a simulation session in April before our April 14th talk, April 11th talk. It will be on the Saturday. We will send more information out to our society about that. That will be an in-person simulation Saturday morning. So thank you all again. Dr. Vashenkova, Dr. Vatican-Cherry, Dr. McGinnis, Dr. Rashan, and Dr. Cosentino, who had to log off. Really appreciate your insight and your wisdom. Thank you all, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.